All right, good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing this afternoon? Why don't you go ahead and say hi to me in chat, and let's get started. So today we are going to be talking or reading through Matthew chapter 16 and 17, maybe a little bit more, probably not though, and talking about just basically what's going on, trying to see if we can use some of our knowledge that we've already discussed about different things, backgrounds of the Bible, and what Jesus' main themes are and all that kind of stuff to try to understand some of this stuff as best as we can. All right. And it is Happy Friday. Hopefully you guys all doing well. And let's go ahead and jump into this. All right. So don't see anybody. I know there's a couple people here. So I see two people with us. And as more people come, go ahead and say hi. But anyway, so if you're there, say hi. It'd be great to hear from you guys. Let's go. I'm just going to go ahead and open us up in prayer before we start. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for this beautiful, beautiful day. And we pray that you would just protect us and heal us from all of our diseases, that you would forgive us of all of our sins, and that you would guide us towards your heart and help us to seek things that are above and know who you are. And not only just to know about you, but to really know you. I pray that you would open up your words to us today and bless us with your love, compassion, and faith in our very own hearts. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so here we go. All right, so, Turjoy. Doesn't sound like somebody from my class, but awesome. Hi, welcome. All right. Oh, we got 4 people, 3 people. All right, anybody? So are we getting more people come? Welcome. Hi. So we're going to start off with, excuse me, looking at this. And this is going to sound somewhat familiar because we've already read something similar to this before, right? And so we're going to, notice some similarities, that this is some one of the things that keeps on popping up, all right? So let's go ahead and read. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus. Now, typically, this is interesting, right? Because Pharisees and Sadducees, they don't typically hang out together, right? So we get Pharisees and Sadducees. They're not friends with each other, not by any stretch of the imagination. But on this occasion, they decided to come together to test Jesus. And they, for whatever reason, were both against Jesus at this time. All right. Awesome. So we get somebody from Bangladesh, and Lupita, hi, how's it going? So, in this occasion, Jesus replied, "When evening comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today, it will be stormy, for the sky is red, all overcast." Right? And so very, very simple things that people used to use to predict the weather. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. This is very interesting. So they're asking Jesus for a sign. Why? Because Jesus is famous for performing miracles. Now, just because he's famous for performing miracles, remember, they don't have any iPhones back then. They don't have video cameras. They don't have social media and all that kind of stuff. So they've heard about Jesus' miracles, but they probably haven't seen it themselves. All right, Jesus did a lot of miracles, and a lot of people saw it. But then again, a lot of people didn't see it, okay? And so these are probably people coming, people wanted to see a sign. They wanted to see Jesus do some miracle. They wanted to see him do something awesome. And then when they did that, Jesus often said no. Very interesting. But in this case, rather than saying no, he's going to put an interesting twist on it and say, you guys, you know how to tell the weather, but you guys should also be able to tell what's going on around you, all right? You should be able to understand the different things, such as the miracles, such as John the Baptist, such as the whole thing with Rome being there, and such as what's going to happen to Jesus later. You guys should understand these and understand them as fulfillment of prophecy. And that's what he's talking about. So Jesus is talking about prophecy here, okay? So you guys should understand the signs of the times, right? A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. And we've heard about this before. We've heard about the sign of Jonah already not too long ago in Matthew, in the book of Matthew. And so we know this is more than one occurrence. Jesus doesn't just talk about the sign of Jonah once, but more than one time. Okay? And so the sign of Jonah talks back to the Old Testament prophet, right? There was a prophet, Jonah, who was inside a whale or eaten by a fish or something like that and then spit up on land. And that was pretty crazy, but he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, and that represented death, okay? So the fish in fish or whale, however we interpret that, for 3 days, and that represented death. And so Jesus picks up on this a lot, and he repeatedly says, the sign of Jonah, the sign of Jonah, the sign of Jonah. And so that death is now representing for Jesus his own crucifixion. And because Jonah didn't just stay in the whale for 3 days, but then he's spit up, so it's the crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection. And so we've said many times before that Jesus done a whole bunch of different miracles, but the one most important one, the one most central to Christianity is the resurrection. No S there. So that resurrection is the most important part, the most key miracle of Jesus, okay? And so he's going to repeatedly refer to that, the sign of Jonah, as the resurrection. That sign of Jonah. So that's going to be a miracle that everybody's going to hear about, that everybody's going to know about. And so when we talk about that, when the sign of Jonah is referring to the death and I'm spelling that wrong. I think there's only one S there. The death and resurrection of Jesus. Okay? That's what it refers to. All right. So, cool. All right, so let's continue on. When they had went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And so, being the fishermen that they were, they had trouble understanding exactly what Jesus was talking about. So they discussed this among themselves and said, it's because we didn't bring any bread, right? We didn't bring any bread. So that's why Jesus is talking about yeast. And then, aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? So Jesus he wasn't upset about them not understanding what he was actually talking about. You know, he's like, okay, whatever. These guys are a little bit slow in understanding. That's okay. But he wasn't happy about their lack of faith. What does that mean, lack of faith? Because they were concerned that they didn't bring any bread. They were concerned that they would be hungry. And so Jesus says, you guys got to trust me. Trust me. You're not going to go hungry. Don't worry about not having enough bread. Trust me. So this whole little, faith aspect, Jesus talks about faith repeatedly, right? And when he's saying that, he's saying, trust me. He's saying, I'm in control. I've got it. Don't worry. It's okay if you don't have bread. We'll figure out a way that you're going to have some food. Okay? All right. So let's continue on. All right. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you have little faith. Why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? So that's a miracle. We didn't talk about the second time, but that's a miracle that Jesus actually repeated. He did more than once, 2 different occasions for 2 different large groups of people. Right? He multiplied bread and fish and other food. How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? Don't worry about food. We got it taken care of. But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now the disciples finally understand. They understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So worry about their teaching. Well, why is yeast referred to as teaching? What in the world does yeast have to do with teaching? Okay, and so yeast has a lot of meanings in the Bible, and yeast is known for something that spreads, right? It's going to spread, it's going to multiply, okay? And so it takes bread and makes it rise. It takes bread and increases the size of it. And so that's the kind of idea that we get here. And so sometimes yeast is in the Old Testament, when we're looking at the Passover meal and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, in that case, the yeast can sometimes represent sin, right? And how sin in our lives can take over and spread. And so we want to kind of have that pure bread, that Feast of Unleavened Bread. So remember that we talked about that back when we were talking about the whole Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover. Okay? Or it can simply be teaching, not necessarily with some kind of bad connotation. So teaching or kind of spreading a message. And so in this context, we're talking about something that's going to cause other people to believe and follow you. Okay? And so Jesus is saying, watch out for this. Watch out for the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees, because sometimes what they say might be tempting to follow, but Jesus is saying, don't follow them. And he has various different reasons. Yes, they say some things that are good. Both Pharisees and Sadducees have some good teachings. He never said that everything they said was wrong. No, in fact, oftentimes for the Pharisees, he said, do what they say, don't do what they do. And so there's a lot of aspects of the teachings of the Pharisees that were actually good. And so Jesus didn't argue with that. But he still did say, watch out for their teaching, because it will lead you astray. It will lead you into hypocrisy and into focusing on the things that are not as important. Remember the Pharisees, so if we can discuss this very briefly again. So we remember the Pharisees, that they focused on the outward appearance. And they had a good reason, right? So they focused on outward, let me rewrite that, the outward appearance. And they had a good reason, because they were confronted all the time by foreigners, by Romans, by the Greeks, and they wanted to emphasize their differences, and so they focused on the outward appearance, and they forgot about the heart. That's why Jesus, or one of the reasons why Jesus emphasized the heart. They forgot about what was important, right? Love and justice, right? And then you have the Sadducees, right? And they compromised with the foreigners. And in compromising with the foreigners, they showed how they loved money, and they didn't always follow God. They loved their money and power. And although they did have some form of religion, they sacrificed that to compromise with the Romans and to follow after those kinds of things. Okay? So we have some various problems with their teachings, and this is just kind of a very small look at that, right? And so Jesus said, be aware of that. So be careful about that. Now I'm getting a whole bunch of comments, so let's just pause here in the video and let me just check this out. So we've got some... This is actually not a chemistry class, right? Most of my stuff is chemistry. This is our Bible class. So in case you were wondering, I'm actually a teacher at a real school. I don't just make YouTube videos. And so at the school where I teach mostly chemistry. I teach chemistry, honors chemistry, AP chemistry. I also teach physics, and occasionally I teach robotics and forensics and one Bible class. So it's a small school, so I have to teach a whole bunch of different things. And so yes, I do teach a Bible class. So anyway, let's continue on here. We have Confessions of Christ, and we're just going to continue on here. Now, this is Jesus. They're talking. So when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, so this is up in the northern area of Israel. In fact, it's really kind of away from Galilee and away from the area where the Jewish people were. And there's a lot of Gentiles here, a lot of pagan worship here going on in Caesarea Philippi. Obviously, the name of that town, Caesarea, is named after Caesar and Philip, right? Caesarea Philippi. And so you've got this kind of very, very Roman name to this particular place, right? And so you do have a lot of pagan worship going on there. So there, Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? So who am I? And this is very, very interesting because so oftentimes we think, well, Jesus was just a good teacher. He was able to heal some people and that's it. But here, once again, and many different times throughout the Bible, but here's one instance where Jesus reveals to them a little bit more about who he really is, the person of Jesus, and not just a teaching. They replied, some say John the Baptist, which is weird because they both lived at the same time. Others say Elijah, which makes a little bit more sense because there were some prophecies that Elijah would return again. And Elijah was a very, very great prophet in the Old Testament who was able to do some miracles too. And still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Okay, so people have different theories of who Jesus is. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? So now he wants to say, these people have been with him for months, if not years at this point in time, probably years. I don't know exactly where in Jesus' teaching this is, but they've probably been together with Jesus for a good 2 years or more. And he wants to know, okay, you guys know me pretty well. Who do you think I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ. And remember, the Christ, that's Messiah. That's the anointed one. The Christ, Messiah, anointed one. It's the one who was prophesied about. He is the king and priest who was to come prophesied about. The Son of the living God. And not just the Christ, but Peter says the Son of the living God. Okay? So the Son of God. The living God, saying specifically, where are they? At this point in time, they are in the region of Caesarea Philippi, where there's a whole lot of pagan worship. And so Peter is very specific in saying he's the Son of the living God, not the son of one of these statues, not the son of some one of the gods, but the Son of the God, the one God who made everything. You are the Son of God. And that's who Peter says. Well, what does Jesus say in response? Because if Peter was just completely wrong, Jesus should have said something. He should have said, no. I mean, if somebody says, okay, you are the Son of God, and you're not, you probably should say, well, no, I'm just a person. I'm just a teacher. And that's exactly what John the Baptist did. People would come to John the Baptist and say, hey, John the Baptist, are you a prophet? Are you the Messiah? And John the Baptist said, no, I'm just a person like you. Let's see how Jesus responds to this. So Jesus replied, blessed. Okay, he didn't say, no, I'm not the Son of God. He said, blessed. That means you are very good, okay? Good job, good student. Blessed are you, Simon, the son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man. This is not just something you figured out, but by my Father in heaven. So not only does Jesus commend him for this answer, but he also says that this knowledge was given to you by God, that this is a revelation of God, and that is truth from God. And I tell you that you are Peter. So here Jesus is actually changing Simon's name here to Peter, that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. And so he said, yes, you guys are absolutely right. And that knowledge that I am the Messiah, that I am the Son of God, that knowledge came to you from God, not just from you guys figuring it out. But don't tell anyone. Why? A very practical reason. At this point in time, if Jesus was known to everyone that he claimed to be Christ and that he claimed to be the Son of God, one of two things would happen. So his ministry, whether one of two things would happen, his ministry would be cut short, and either people would forcibly make him the king and start to have some sort of conflict with Rome, or they would crucify him right away. And so this must be a little bit earlier on in his ministry, and Jesus saying, it's not time yet, okay? I need to just teach and heal people and go all over the place. I don't want people really knowing who I am yet, because that would cut short his teaching ministry. And Jesus cared about teaching. He wanted to teach. He wanted to heal people. He didn't just come to die, although we as Christians believe that his death and resurrection is the most important thing he did. That's not the only thing he did. He also came to teach people and help people. And he wanted people to hear his teaching. And so he didn't want his ministry to be cut short. Excuse me. Okay. So continuing on. So from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Jesus' crucifixion, and this is actually something that some people nowadays don't understand, okay? Some people think that Jesus, his whole crucifixion and everything was a surprise to him, but it was not. This makes it very clear. In fact, also, Jesus talking about the sign of Jonah makes it very clear that Jesus knew what was going to happen to him. And again, here, once again, Jesus makes it very clear that well before he was crucified, Jesus knew about it. Right? He knew about his death, and he knew about his resurrection. It was no surprise to him, okay? Yes, when the time came, he was afraid because of all of the pain and suffering and shame that crucifixion involved. But from the very start, Jesus knew about it. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to be raised to life. It wasn't a surprise to him. That's why he talked about the sign of Jonah. And we can see here in the Bible that Jesus is telling his disciples, he's trying to prepare them, because they don't understand what's going on. They think still that Jesus is going to come in and he's going to save the day and kick the Romans out and all this kind of stuff. But Jesus trying to get it through their heads, guys, I am going to be killed. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be a sacrifice for you guys. And don't worry, I will be raised to life again. He knew it ahead of time. But look at this. Peter, who had just proclaimed that he knew who Jesus was, now he didn't really understand the big picture. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." So Peter didn't want him to die. Obviously, Peter didn't want him to die because Peter didn't understand the importance of his death, and he cared about Jesus. Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Now, we don't know whether Jesus was calling Peter Satan at that point of time, or whether Satan was there tempting Peter. We don't exactly understand what's going on. There's various different interpretations of that. But clearly, Jesus is saying, you are wrong, Peter. This is not, I came here to the earth to die for you guys, and I need to do it. That is the plan of God. God has a plan. The plan sounds scary. It doesn't make sense. We think to ourselves, man, why didn't God just figure out some other way to forgive us? Why didn't God just do it some different way? Why didn't God just make us as good people? And why did God allow us to get into all this sin? So there's so many things we could ask, why? And it's sometimes we just can't get to the bottom of those questions, right? But Jesus is saying, guys, God has a plan. Trust me. All right? And don't keep on saying this, because when we think that way, when we say, no, Jesus, you don't need to die, Jesus says, no. The plan of God is for me to die, and don't tempt me to, not obey the plan of God. So then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." And this is huge. This is the call. This is Jesus' call for disciples. And he's saying that when you want to be a disciple, you're not just going to have it easy. You're not just going to have a lot of good things. You will have some good things. You'll have a lot of good things. But on this earth, there are going to be difficulties. And one of the main difficulties is that we must deny yourself. And that's one of the key things that we need to keep in mind, that following Jesus or having faith in God means that we need to, need to deny ourselves. And that's absolutely necessary if we are going to actually make God our God. That's one of the fundamental things of faith. Part of faith is trusting and following Jesus. And sometimes that means doing things that we don't want to do, or not doing things that we do want to do. So following Jesus means that we need to deny ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean, this can be sometimes very misunderstood. This doesn't mean that we go off and whip ourselves or, keep ourselves away from each other. This does not mean that we need to behave as monks. Jesus' disciples were never monks, not at all. All right? But it does mean then, going back to the idea of the Sadducees, that we don't compromise with, the world and just follow after money and power, right? There's nothing wrong with money and power. It's okay to have money and power, but that is not our God. Our God must be God, and following after Jesus means that we need to deny ourselves, that we are not in the driver's seat, that Jesus is in the driver's seat and we're following him, okay? And so that's the big call here to discipleship, okay? Here we are. So if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. Not saying that we need to die, but saying that we need to stop being our own master, stop being our own gods. That goes back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, they, from the very beginning, why did they even eat the fruit? Because the serpent tempted them and said, eat this fruit. It's going to make you like gods, and you can choose good and evil. Right? From the very beginning, people have wanted to be gods. People want to make their own decisions and be in charge of themselves. But if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to have eternal life, he says you need to lose your life. Not die, but lose your own control of yourself. Not to go crazy, not to just, do crazy things. That's not at all what this is saying. It's just saying you need to give control of your life to God. Right? That's kind of the main point that Jesus is saying here. Okay? And that is, give control of your life to God. And once again, God's not going to ask you to do something crazy. That's not God. God doesn't ask you to do something crazy, okay? At least crazy in the real thing, all right? So when he's saying give the control of your life to God, he's saying trust me. I'm going to give you good things, right? I'm going to, remember when the disciples were worrying about food, Jesus fed them, right? He gave them food. So trust him. He's going to provide for you. He's not going to make you go hungry. He's not going to give bad things to you, but give control of your life to God, and God will take care of you. So, let me see. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. So if you try to control your life and do everything, you're going to end up realizing that you are not able to control it. But whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? Your soul, your eternal soul, is worth so much more than your life here. For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. What does this mean? The Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The Son of Man coming in his kingdom is not talking about the end of the world. How do I know that? Because the very next chapter is the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Remember, the kingdom refers to the family of God. right? And the Son of Man refers to Jesus. So seeing Jesus in the family of God. So it's basically meaning seeing Jesus as he really is. And that's exactly what happens in the very next chapter, okay? There is no doubt in my mind, and no doubt in the mind of 99% of the theologians that understand this. The Transfiguration is referring to the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, okay? And so Jesus is going to fulfill that prophecy right now, right? After 6 days, so just less than a week later, Jesus fulfills what he just told them. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, 3 of his closest disciples, the brother of Jesus, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. He only wanted to show a few of his closest followers what he really looked like. This kind of reminds me, when I read it, of when Moses asked to see God, and God passed before him, and he was able to see part of God, right? And so this is kind of the same kind of deal here, right? So Jesus' 3 closest followers are able to see him as he is. There, he was transfigured before them. Transfigured, that means he was changed. He was changed so that they could see his real, what he really looked like. Not just his earthly body, but his heavenly body. So there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. So not just like an ordinary white shirt, but it shined like light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. So Jesus is just up there chilling and talking with 2 people that had died or just directly gone into heaven. Very interesting. Elijah never died, and he was taken up. So he was a prophet, very powerful prophet, and he was taken up in a flaming chariot before he ever died, right? And so he's somebody that never died. Moses, we think that he died, but it's not really clear. He went up to a mountain and was with God, and then he never came down. So both of those people being 2 of the most important prophets in the Old Testament who lived, a long time ago, 1,000 years ago or more. Okay? So Peter said to Jesus, he's got no idea what's going on. So Peter is totally just like blanking here. But Peter always has to, Peter's one of those guys that always has to say something, right? You know people like that. They just can't shut up. So Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Yeah, obviously. Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters. 1 for you, 1 for Moses, and 1 for Elijah. Like 3 tents for all you guys. So he's like, hang out. So we're just going to put up some tents. You guys can hang out. We're glad that we're here. And that's it. But notice the response. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. So this implies that it's God speaking, right? A voice from the cloud speaking. And what does the voice say? The voice doesn't say, hey, good job, Peter, I'm glad you're here. No, the voice says, don't worry about Moses and Elijah. Moses and Elijah were amazing prophets, right? But Jesus is not just a prophet, right? Moses and Elijah were amazing. They did amazing things. And it's amazing that you get to see them. But Jesus is my son. He's the one that you really should be focusing on. And what was really amazing is that Jesus' disciples here got to see Jesus for who he was. That was what Jesus was talking about just a few days earlier, right? That you're going to see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. This is the Son of Man, Jesus, coming in his kingdom. So he's with the family of God, with Moses and Elijah hanging out. That's part of the family of God. And they got to see it. That was amazing. What was most amazing was that they got to see who Jesus really was. That was more amazing than Moses and Elijah. And God, the Father, wanted to tell them Jesus is who it's all about. It's not about Moses. It's not about Elijah. Then the disciples, when the disciples heard this, they fell face down on the ground, terrified because they heard God. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Wow, what an experience that was. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And so once again, Jesus is saying, hey, guys, be quiet. I still want to teach here on earth. I still have to do ministry, and so keep it quiet. The disciples asked him, "Why then did teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" So they're starting to wonder, all right, finally we know indeed Jesus is truly the Messiah, but we thought that Elijah was supposed to come before the Messiah, right? There's a prophecy that Elijah was supposed to come before the Messiah, and we just saw Elijah, and, I thought he was supposed to come first before you. What's going on? So Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes, and will restore all things. But I tell you," so here Jesus is basically quoting that prophecy, "But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished to. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." So the disciples then understood. They're getting smarter, right? The disciples then understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. So John the Baptist wasn't Elijah, but he was the prophet who was coming like Elijah. And so John the Baptist was the Elijah-like prophet who was going to prepare the way for Jesus. He was going to prepare the way for the Messiah. So that is who this Elijah was, that prophecy of Elijah was referring to. Okay? So it's 2:30 now. I'm going to go ahead and close out. We got about 5 more minutes, but actually, you know what? We do have 5 more minutes. So I want to skip. We're not quite done the chapter, but I think I want to skip down to the temple tax because I think that's interesting. We have some more discussion. We got a boy that's going to be healed and all that. We've talked about healing, but you know what? I want to go ahead and skip down to the temple tax, and that's because it's kind of interesting. Okay, and then we'll be done. All right. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked, because Jesus knows everything, right? And so he knows exactly what Peter said. "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own sons or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. And so Jesus is basically saying, well, I'm the Son of God, so I don't really need to pay taxes for God. But this is what Jesus says. "Then the sons are exempt," Jesus said, "but so that we may not offend them." So Jesus didn't want to offend people, right? So that we may not offend them, although sometimes Jesus does offend people if they're totally in the wrong. But here they're not in the wrong. "So that we may not offend them, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." So pretty cool. So Jesus pays the tax, and he didn't really have the money on hand, so he makes a miracle happen such that they get the tax for both of them. And so when he gets the opportunity, Jesus doesn't want to offend people if possible. He clearly offends the Pharisees a lot because the Pharisees are being hypocrites oftentimes, and he wants to offend them and get to the heart of what's really, really important to God. But if it's not an issue of, matter of truth and what God's teaching, he doesn't really want to offend people. And so that's, I don't know, that was a good little end to our story here, and we're going to end with that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end there. All right, hopefully you guys have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I just want to say blessings to you guys all. Stay healthy, stay well. It'd be great if I could see some of you guys soon, but I know that's probably not going to happen. All right, so later. Any questions, anybody? I know so you guys have been working on your homework. Hopefully you do have one homework that's due today, and you have another homework, a class participation question that I believe that's due Monday. So make sure you guys are working on that. You'll find them in Google Classroom. And if you guys have any questions at all, please email me. And if you have any missing assignments, if you have to turn something in super late, please email it to me. Don't just upload it on Google Classroom because I don't find them. All right. Only put things on Google Classroom if you're turning it in on time. If you're turning in late, just email it directly to me so that I can find it and I don't have to go hunting around for it. All right. Anyway, blessings and see you guys. Have a great and wonderful weekend.